If you were here last week, you know Brandon had car trouble, couldn't make it. Well, his car ain't fixed, and there's bad weather outside, but the Limitless Rewind will still happen. Before I roll that open and I break down Limitless Personality Crisis, let me remind you that there are limited first printings of my 68-page graphic novel, Everlasting Survivors Volume 1, all day long, available with a link in the description below to my Etsy store. If you would like one of the only 50 ever printed Nick Crook covers, there are some still available. And if you would like one of the only 100 ever printed Jeff Hicks covers, when these sell out, they will never be printed again. So, thank you for tuning in. Enjoy the open. Enjoy the review. Thank you. My first note is, with this title of Personality Crisis, please let us get tons of Brian talking to Brian. We sort of get what I want, but just not in the way that I was expecting. In the prior episodes, we would see a manifestation of NZT Brian talking to NZT Brian. But in this case, we see NZT Brian has recorded messages for regular Brian, as he's calling him. He created clay models of all parties involved in the stories that he's telling to Brian, or regular Brian. The moral of the story is always, don't tell Rebecca. Because in the prior episode, at the end of episode 4, page 44, Brian discovers that the FBI knew that Rebecca's father was taking NZT. And so NZT Brian, knowing that regular Brian is a good stand-up fellow who cares about his fellow human being, specifically in this case Rebecca, leaves him messages recorded that say, don't tell Rebecca. Because clearly telling her that the FBI knew about her father being on NZT would mean he'd have to tell her that he stole from the FBI. So in every case, NZT Brian explains that 100% of the time, telling Rebecca equals death. However, he does say, maybe it means prison, but just think of prison as death. And so Edward Mora and Mr. Sand's stuff is really weighing heavy on Brian. But it's great to see that he, regular Brian, wants to do what's right. He is still the good guy. It's just, the confident NZT Brian is trying to lead him astray. A new reveal to us, the audience, is that even if NZT Brian isn't paying attention, he's able to rewind, theoretically rewind, and play back conversations that have happened around him. And it's pretty cool because, you can be distracted and still retain the information that you got when on NZT. And so it was just a fun little quirk, or, like I said, addition to this world. So the conversation that NZT Brian, wasn't paying attention to leads to him being out in a surveillance van with the FBI as they're trying to figure out if this brother of a suspected terrorist is in on it. And so while Brian is sitting in the van, he's drinking way too much cranberry juice, and even one of the guys with him is like, oh, you got to have self-discipline when it comes to the drinking. And so it's funny because on screen there's like a tracker that just shows that he's full up and has to go. And so Brian does exactly what he's told not to do, and he goes into the building the FBI is surveilling. While he's trying to find a restroom, Brian literally bumps into the dude who the FBI is keeping an eye on. This leads to Brian trying to stop the, I don't know if suspect's the right word, but the person they're surveilling from getting away. And even though Brian can remember all the things. He doesn't know how to execute the moves, and so quickly he gets knocked out. And when he comes to, he tells Rebecca that I slowed him down for you. Back at the FBI, the kid who they had been watching, the one who knocked out Brian, we find out he's actually a really good kid, a upstanding character. Much like Brian, he cares for his family, and the kid reminds Brian of himself in that way, and so they really bond over it, and Brian is able to piece together things that most of the other FBI folks wouldn't have figured out. He says, oh, most likely his brother's email account is a collection of these things that he likes, and so the FBI are crunching the numbers to figure it out. Being able to relate to people, not the NZT, is Brian's real superpower. It's how he has created a bond with Rebecca. It's how he's creating a bond with Chris, the kid that they picked up from the surveillance. It's really what makes Brian stand out above and beyond Edward Morrow from the film. And also, it's Brian's own character, which makes him not be able to sleep at night, and he's staying up rewatching the messages while off of NZT that the Brian on NZT left him. So when Ike shows up in the morning to give Brian his pill, Brian is already awake and ready to go. He pauses the video of him talking to himself. He looks at Ike and says, when I'm on NZT, I'm pretty annoying, or I can be pretty annoying. And Ike says, we've noticed, which is so appropriate. The reason Ike has arrived so early is to take Brian to like an FBI self-defense training. On the way to it, Brian imagines both the game of operation and every Bruce Lee training montage that he can recall. The game of operation is for like limb targeting, and Bruce Lee is because master of fighting type stuff, at least in Brian's mind. After Brian has trained for a while with Casey, the FBI self-defense guy or specialist, Agent Harris, Rebecca, she interrupts because one of Brian's thoughts about how to figure out what Chris has planned for this terrorist attack. Chris's brother Sam has planned for the terrorist attack paid off, and they figured out that he was using using an email account, much like Brian had suspected, and within the draft folder, information sent them to a hospital called Sacred Heart Hospital. The camera lingers on a sign that says Herb Thompson Radiology Center. This makes me assume that maybe Herb Thompson is important to the story, but it turns out it's just the radiology center that was important, not Herb, because supplies from the radiology department have been stolen. These materials can be used to make a dirty bomb. The FBI boss lady, I think her name is like Naz or something like that, she is a really not nice person. She wants Brian to use the fact that he is bonded with the brother Chris who's in custody to manipulate him to figure out where that Sam, the presumed terrorist, is. And even though Brian is legitimately a good guy and he doesn't like what she wants, he goes through with what she says, even so much so that he constructs fake emails to show to Chris to pretend as though they know more about Sam than Chris himself does. I also really hate when Rebecca Harris is on board with the FBI wanting Brian to do bad, because, at least in my mind, she ought to be on his side. In the episode, Harris tells Brian it gets easier to lie to your informants, and he asks her if it gets easier to lie to your consultants. And she's defensive and says, oh, it's not the same, but, a lie is a lie, and when you're manipulating somebody like this show is known to do, it's not good for the parties involved. At about the halfway point of the episode, it's revealed that Rebecca Harris is dating Casey, the fighting trainer, secretly. They haven't come out and told the FBI because they don't want to put a label on their relationship. because Brian is still struggling with the knowledge that he knows that he's unable to tell Rebecca, he does something quite gutsy that I didn't see coming, and he calls Mr. Sands and has a meeting set up in his own apartment. And the intrigue of this is Sands is basically just irritated by it, and he says if Harris is a distraction, Senator Mora has the power to have your handler changed, which immediately changes Brian's perspective on everything. He's now I've got to be no more Mr. Happy Nice Guy Brian. I've got to become badass Brian. And he puts on a leather coat, and he's hardening his heart. And immediately upon making that decision, that's when Chris, the younger brother of Sam, the suspected terrorist, comes to his door, and thankfully Brian softens his stance, and Chris is willing to help the FBI stop his brother Sam, but only if they promise to, get his brother an education and basically be nice to him. The FBI boss lady once again has Brian lie to Chris for so-called the greater good. So Brian paints a picture like prison's going to be a vacation camp, and while he's painting this picture, he fantasizes that Mike and Ike are, helping out Sam while in, Supermax prison. And so anyway, Chris, the younger brother, does convince Sam to meet up with him before the FBI go to capture Sam, before he can do whatever it is he's going to do with the radiology stuff and make the dirty bomb like they said. Brian goes in for more training with Casey, and Casey is super suspicious because Brian is too good. He's learned too quickly, and obviously the fact is it's NCT, but Brian just says I'm a quick learner or quick study, and that's what everybody says whenever Casey asks about it, because he also asks Rebecca Harris about it, and she says the same line back to Casey. This episode is really good at keeping that Limitless universe theme of manipulation going strong. Because unfortunately Brian has to manipulate Chris, the younger brother, so that they can capture Sam, the older brother. But when they go for the big meetup, Sam doesn't come alone. He has a known big bad guy named, I think they said his name was Alan, with him. And Chris accidentally tips off Sam and Alan that he gave up that this meeting was happening. This leads to a big chase and gunfire exchanged. Harris's partner Boyle shoots the real big bad guy, Alan, but not before he's able to shoot Chris. Brian is crushed that this has happened. He blames himself for lying to the kid and thinks had he not lied, this would have never happened. Surprisingly to me, Chris actually dies in the episode, which I guess sort of has to happen to open Brian's eyes to everything. Brian confronts Rebecca because of her saying that it would get easier to lie. And she has to admit that in and of itself was a lie, the fact that it gets easier. When Harris admits that it was a lie, that lying gets easier, Brian calls her out on the fact that she's been lying about seeing Casey. And she's taken aback by his knowledge, and he uses simple deduction. He can smell Casey's perfume or cologne on Harris after they've been together, and in the morning meetings, how that he lingers with her after they're over, things of that nature. And so it once again is a bonding moment between Rebecca and Brian, because he's honest with her. And she freely admits to Casey that Brian knows, and he said, "Oh, I guess we should sign those HR forms now." But as a callback to the beginning of the episode where NZT Brian left messages for regular Brian, at the end of this episode, regular Brian off NZT leaves a message for NZT Brian, and the message is, just because you remember everything doesn't mean you know everything, which is such a true statement. Brian tells NCT Brian, "We're not omniscient. Otherwise, today would have gone much differently." The episode ends very strong with Brian going to Rebecca's place to tell her the truth about the FBI's knowledge about her father. This, to me, is a big rebound from last week where I didn't like that Brian was taking a dark turn. Because of the big comeback, I give this one the spectacular score of 6 out of 5 because to me, this is by far the best of Limitless, the TV show, so far. Thank you for listening to my review of Limitless Personality Crisis. Come back this Friday. See you Monday and tune in next Wednesday for the Wednesday Rewind. Later.